hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so upon the earth. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen. Amen. Be seated. Please be seated. I heard you say there, Haley, about we're doing a creation. So just very, very briefly, last month we looked at day one. And that is all about new light breaking forth in our life into areas particularly where there's chaos. So think about the story of Genesis. Light breaks forth first. There's no source of light except the Lord. And it shines over the chaos of what's inside us, and the Lord begins to hover over that and do a new work. And so the message from that really simply is, whenever we're reading sacred text, or even if we're just doing something else, hello Dr. Null, we're reading a book, we're talking, and there's a sudden breakthrough of insight, revelation and light, that's a moment where day one processes are beginning to unfold. And what we need to do is be with the Lord and hover over that moment. We need to stay with it, keep that idea, don't let it slip, because so often if you let those moments slip, they're gone forever. They are. Well, they're not gone forever. The Lord knows what he's doing, but he will have to revisit that. So that opportunity is gone forever. And if we actually become hard-hearted towards that light, it becomes more difficult for the Lord to keep breaking forth with light in that area. So day one, a new revelation of something, an insight, and with it a conviction to start to try and bring it into reality. That then will bring us to day two, day three, so on and so on and so on. And Ian and I were talking about this last week. Day three, although Swedenborg talks about the earth coming up out of the waters, in a very practical sense, it's conscience. You're having a real conviction and conscience. You've got something solid to stand on now. I used to think this was okay. Now my conscience shows me it's not okay. Something to stand on. But let's have a look at day two. Now, before we dig in, and we've got lots to do, so I love and welcome the interruptions. Bring them on, bring the interruptions, bring the questions, bring the thoughts, the comments. But be brief so that we do make it through the text. We can always get through the text and then really go for it if you want to, but just watching the time. So who is familiar? Yeah, go.
When you mentioned about chaos, Jordan Peterson, who's very popular at the moment, his book 12 Rules of Life is called An Antidote to Chaos.
Yes.
So yes. Yeah, he's talking about chaos and how you can get rid of the chaos and whatever. So
and what,
with that.
Beautiful, thank you, Paul. What you'll find...
Oh, sorry, after this, a quickie?
Yes.
Okay, in other translations, the firmament is called a canopy and a few other things, and it's known in the Sumerian text as the Hammond bracelet.
A Hammond bracelet, wow.
Hammond bracelet, and what it is the asteroid belt.
The asteroid belt.
See, I know that this, to go back through the first chapter of Genesis, I know that this is the method and the means of the 12-step recovery, and I know that it works, and I know that it's right. But it's also historical and anatomical.
It has to be, Bill.
And when it says the waters,
yes,
the water was there before the light.
Yes.
Because it said so. And
yes.
It was.
The water's
and it's all through the universe, right? There's water right out there in deep space.
Yes.
Our whole solar system is covered in it.
Everything that happens inside us as we grow into the image of God, everything has to be out there. It has to be, because everything will be according to order. But Bill, quantum science, it was, Einstein and others that were working on it. To their shock, they discovered, is it not on yet? It's on. To their shock, they discovered that light, they're trying to figure out, is it a particle or is it a wave? Like a sound wave.
Oh.
And it's both. It's absolutely both. and at all times. But when we observe it, it changes depending on our observations. Now, to their shock, they discovered that all matter, all of external life, everything you think is out there, is not out there, folks. It's going on in the mind of God and in our mind. It's not actually out there. This is what they discovered to their shock, that all matter is both a wave and a particle, and it's the observer that defines what's out there. So, Bill, it's impossible for any of this to be real inside us if it's not actually, doesn't have some physical correspondence, is what Swedenborg calls it. A physical correspondence out there. It has to have a correspondence. But what's of great importance to us today is, what is this space that we're going to find? Buddhists do a lot of this work, finding this space within you where you can now grow spiritually because you can access this space within you. That's what we're going to talk about today. But who knows the story of Abraham and Sarah's infertility? Do you know that story? Does most hands? Do you know the story of Sarah couldn't have a baby? And yet God had promised Abraham to have a baby. And they ended up giving birth to Hagar through his handmaid. He had to send Hagar and the child away. Exactly what this is talking about. And I see Bill's going, what? He's going, say what? You don't know, it's exactly, you see, Abraham experienced grief when God said send the woman and her child away. And every time we begin to separate from our lower ego, we're going to feel some grief. There'll be a pain in the process. But the Lord promised that Hagar's son would grow up and become a nation. So I don't want to complicate this, but very, very simply, here it is, right? Hagar's son represents our rational view of the world, our natural, rational. It's what comes first. God's promised to make you a spiritual person, but first you get a natural, rational view of the world, and you think this is reality. But Swedenborg says, no, that's called the illusion of your senses. They're passing away. But that illusion, which you have to reject, also gets to become a son of God, becomes a nation. But not till Isaac, not till we have a spiritual worldview, right? Then when Isaac comes, everything that you thought about nature suddenly has a spiritual message to it. That's the rising up of Hagar's son, Ishmael, into a nation, right? And Swedenborg says it this way. Jesus didn't come to save the celestial people. If we had stayed celestial, if our ancestors had stayed celestial, there would have been no need for salvation. But because the celestial fell away, the birth of Ishmael came, right? A new time where man became very scientific, very rational, thinking about the world through the senses. That needs to be purified and raised up into a spiritual understanding, or there can be no salvation, right? So that's what this is talking about, the raising up of the waters below through heat processes, through the sun, evaporation, all of that is talking about our natural mind being spiritualized. But in order to do that, we have to learn to enter the space between. So we're ready to do that, to learn about how to... I'll say one other thing before we do that. I used to think the space between was a place of pure bliss, right? Nirvana, like the Buddhists talk about, you know, or Shakti, as the Christians, Hare Krishnas talk about. But I found it's only day 2. You can enter the space between, and you can still be suffering and feeling pain of this world, but there is a separation. And I say that because it's important for us to realise that we may be entering these processes throughout the day all the time without even realising we're doing it. It's not some place of supreme bliss. That's day 7, by the way. Although we get tastes of it in day 5, the rapid growth of fish and birds and all that sort of stuff. We get tastes of the bliss of the joy of the world to come. But this process here of getting into the space between, it's about us learning to separate from the things that are tormenting us in life. And if you're breathing, there'll be something that's tormenting you, I promise you. It's about learning to separate from it not dispose of it, separate from it, accept the reality of what it is, and begin to grow. That's what acceptance and commitment therapy. I love acceptance and commitment therapy because Steve had this experience, his day 2 experience. He did, like a near-death experience. And he talks about, and I've spoken to him directly about this, and I said, wow, this relates completely to what we see as day 2 processes. And I asked if I could quote things from his book. He said, go for it. Just be careful of copyright. So you got my full permission, but I don't own my books anymore, he says, But he had this near-death experience, anxiety actually, and he separated from his ego. Now he'll tell you, he still suffers, but now he knows how to separate from that and process. Let's begin. Day 2. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. What was that, Bill? A hammered
bracelet.
Boy, it feels like that sometimes, doesn't it? The Lord is trying you and hammering you. Let there be a firmament, a space, in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Okay, so there's earthly waters, which we call the oceans, full of salt. Not real good drinking stuff, is it? Stuff of life, but you can't drink it. Let it divide it from the waters above, the purified waters that are clean and pure, and the rivers of living water. Let it divide the waters from the waters, and God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament, what do you call it, everyone? Again, one really loud. He called it heaven. This is where we get our first taste of heaven. Day 2. I can still feel my emotions churning. I can still feel my physical body having issues. But my mind is being lifted up into the first taste of real heaven. Is that good news? Yeah. It's great, isn't it? Yeah. That's why so many people become Buddhists. They love it. It's like, wow, I can finally stop suffering in a sense. I can start to rise above it. But it's only day 2. There's so much more work for us to do. And the evening and the morning were the second day. So let's start to dig in now into day 2 processes. And if you don't feel up to reading, that's perfectly okay. Do you want to read some? Do you want to read that first paragraph for us? Okay.
Day 2, Hebrew. Following on the explosion of light, day 1, we are now propels upwards.
Should be propelled.
Propelled.
Where's my red pen?
Propelled upwards through the separation of the waters, terrestrial from the waters celestial, and the introduction of a great expanse. The work of day 2 offers to us something both wonderful and sublime, all through the power of separation and detachment. Here the Lord is creating a quiet and unique space of intimacy where non-judgmental and communion can take place within.
Oh, I like that. He turned non-judgmental communication into non-judgmental and communion. That's really good. What do we think of that? This space is for what? This space inside us is a place where we meet God and do what? Have non-judgmental conversations. Think about the voices in your head. How easy is it to have a non-judgmental conversation with yourself? I'm glad to see you smile, Jade. It's not actually that easy, is it? Because our default mode network, the brain, that part of our brain, the core of our brain, is a problem solver. It's a survivor. It's a fight and survive and keep you alive. Therefore, it's very harsh on you, very critical. And it's the perfect tool for evil spirits to beat the heck out of you. But it's that voice that's always correcting you and criticizing and judging and keeping you alive. But it's not going to save you as much as it promises to. You've got to lift above that and get into the flow of the Lord, where you can hear that quiet voice of the angels. So it's a place of non-judgmental conversation. And what did you call it? Communion. I love that. We're starting to really commune with the Lord. Do you want to read the next bit, Russell?
Yep.
Does anybody want to comment on that? Ian, did you want to?
I was going to say, it's a little bit like self-psychology. You're actually observing your own thoughts and
It's
emotions.
exactly what it is. Thank you, Russell. Because Swedenborg says in the writings, the ability to self-observe is not natural, it's spiritual. It's an act of God. Animals don't self-observe, do they?
Well, Deepak Chopra says the universe is within you.
Beautiful.
which is exactly what
Jesus said the same
I would
thing.
agree with that.
Jesus said the same thing. That I think
That's
Deepak
right.
Chopra was quoting Jesus.
The kingdom of heaven is within you. Yeah, beautiful. Russell, any other thoughts? Say that again. What was it?
It's a bit like self-psychology. You're observing your own thoughts and emotions.
Yes.
That's all thoughts come into your mind from the day before or what's happening in the future, but you're observing it from a separate view, like an audience. You're observing your own movie.
You've actually learned to enter the high tower, the ivory tower of observation. Just non-judgmental observation.
Well, this recalls something I don't know whether I learned it here, but I learned it somewhere. Be wedded to the process and divorced from the outcome.
Oh, beautiful.
And that's absolutely necessary in living one day at a time.
One day, yeah.
And that's the same that is involved with this.
Yes, beautiful.
That observation of self.
Self-observation. That's exactly
witnessing.
what... Sorry?
It is witnessing.
Yes, it's day 2.
Yeah.
2 is the number of witnessing. Thank you, Dr. Noel. That's beautiful. The witness.
One of those. You do.
So people that aren't in that process, what you're saying is they're pretty much living in their ego and they're not tapping into that spiritual tower.
Bingo. Swedenborg would say that their spiritual self is asleep or dead. They're just stuck in the ego.
You can see it with some people, a lot of celebrities, sometimes when they interview them, or just that self-love, you can actually see it.
You can see it, can't you? Yeah, it just oozes like oil.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, Russell, that was a good comment. Do you want to read something?
Yeah, I'll read something.
Yep.
The light and work coming from day 1 processes can now aid us in the practice of day 2 spiritual work. Here we are being called to be the observer of the inner and outer states. No longer need we be limited in our psychological or physiological functions by an autopilot response. Instead, the power of divine enlightenment will expand our options. Divine light enables us to act, think and feel at the same time as shifting our awareness into detached states of consciousness. Non-judgmental curiosity about our motives, choices and true desires can be allowed to grow inside the mind and heart of the advancing soul.
Beautiful.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it is a beautiful thought. Any comments or thoughts on that?
It's something like a lotus in a water.
Lotus in the water.
So you are there in the water, but you're out of the water. So you have the witnessing power to not get attached to the water, but getting out of it and then watching.
How beautiful, yes. Now think about this. Notice a time when your observing powers were curiously analysing somebody else. Maybe even in a non-judgmental way. You're just curiously analysing them, going, wonder why they're doing that. Wonder why they're saying like that. Wonder what's made them feel that way. Right? It's not that hard to do, is it? Because they're not you. They're separate, in a sense. But if you try and do that about self, the ego doesn't like to let go. It wants to churn up all sorts of feelings. But this is really a process of observing yourself as if you were someone else, which is exactly why Jordan Peterson says in chapter 2 of his book, take care of yourself as if you were someone else. He said too many people will go and take care of someone and unattachedly, have you had your medication? Have you had your shower? Have you done this? Have you got food? He said, but they won't take care of themselves. That's the ego trap. So part of this day 2 power is learning to stop being so invested in self. You can really start, this is a place where God can really put his finger on you and tell you stuff about you, and it doesn't hurt anymore, and you can let him work on you. A friend of mine, Chris, Chris Atkinson, he said to me years ago, though he forgets saying it, he said, Jesus is the only person I know that can cut you up into 1,000 pieces and you say thank you for it.
You don't thank him till afterwards.
Yeah, that's where, unless you're in the day 2 moment. You're in a moment where, you're being friends with God and it's not hurting. You're just listening, you're observing, you're.
Well, just a practical comment.
Yes.
If you're helping, if you're not looking after yourself but looking after somebody else, what you're going to do half the time is ask them questions.
Ask some questions.
Taking your tablets if you had no sleep, have you done it? And young males hate being asked questions by their mother. So, if you're taking care of yourself, you're not involved in asking questions all the time. But that's just a little practical thing.
It's a beautiful thing, in fact, because I'm trying at the same time to work on a book called Sacred Seven, where I go into this a lot more. And notes I've written to myself for day 2 would be questing. And why this is a questing is because it's a questioning time. It's a time of questing, you know. Practice questing, searching and asking questions about yourself. Why did I do that? What was my motive? What's going on here? And that's the non-judgmental observer coming out in you through the questions, Bill. Those.
See, questing, that sounds like medieval knights going on a quest.
Sure.
And they're looking for an answer.
We're looking for
there's a bit of a difference between asking well, I suppose we are looking for an answer, but the process of questioning someone, particularly if you're older and they're younger, they don't like it.
No. There's a sci-fi series called Stargate Atlantis or something, right?
Yeah.
I love the name because Atlantis was supposed to be here on Earth, but the idea of the sci-fi is it's out there in space somewhere, Bill, deep in space, Atlantis. Now, I want you to think about this. We are on a quest. We're on a journey to find a place. It's called New Jerusalem. But we discover it's actually not a place. It's a state, as you were saying, inside us called heaven. So we need the pathway to walk to get to New Jerusalem. That's what we're on. That's our quest.
Right.
I do sort of dabble on that a little bit in here. Let's keep going. Russell, read us another one. You did a good job. I enjoyed that.
Oh, right.
You did too. I just won't put you on the spot too much.
Day 2 spiritual work invites us to practice self-awareness through self-acceptance. In this higher state of consciousness, we can perceive that our life consists of thinking, feeling and acting, and yet we also recognise that we are not our thinking, we are not our feelings, and we need not be defined by our actions. It is the lower waters of the earthly ego that keeps us submerged and unconscious of the life of God, which flows into the soul, perpetually creating all things. Genuine self-acceptance, or being the observer, involves awareness of the lower ego through one's inner and outer patterns while not owning those patterns. It is through this kind of practice that we can truly become aware of the conditioning that has taken place within our psychology as a direct result of the belief systems we have embraced.
I want to open up for questions and thoughts, but take this one key out of that paragraph. More than anything, say to yourself, or say it now with me aloud, I am not these feelings. Now that one's powerful because we can get we're not our thoughts and we can even detach from our actions, but feelings are the hardest. Just, you could be in the moment of the traffic jam, that's always a good one, and you could just say, I am not these feelings. Breathe. I am not these feelings. It's very powerful to start realising that feelings are something flowing into you. I'm not these feelings. Okay, so other thoughts on that paragraph? Yeah.
I have to treat people in their 40s, 50s and even 60s because they were rejected by their mother as infants.
Wow.
And they learned a way of coping. And they think that they really think that they are not as good.
Wow.
Because that's the only way that you can make sense of how your mother, who is supposed to love you and teach you how important you are, how she's treated you. And the only way to do it is to say, well, she treats the other children, she loves them, but she doesn't sort of love me. Well, maybe I'm unlovable. And you learn to live in a way that reduces the pain of that.
Right.
And I see that all the time. And so that it's an essential part of the treatment that you are not these feelings. You are a unique child. You are a unique person deliberately created by a loving God with specific gifts.
Wow.
And I said that 2 weeks ago to a bloke who came along 6 years of seeing a psychologist with ADD, ADHD and ASD. And I said to him, you are not on the ASD spectrum.
Right.
You are not. You are a unique creation of God.
Wow.
And my job is going to involve helping you find out how you are to use your gift
Yes.
in God's service. Anyway, they cancelled the next appointment, and there was a letter associated with the cancellation, and I just didn't bother reading it because I sort of knew what it was. I've had these things before. How dare you? How dare you say that somebody is supposed to be on the spectrum?
Yes.
Everyone's on the spectrum these days.
Yes.
When I don't believe it exists. I believe that these are eccentrics. Eccentrics have been beloved for centuries by England and Holland.
Yes.
Yeah,
And,
love our century.
Look, I would agree.
He's one.
Look, Bill, I would agree. You know, what are words? Words are just symbols that are meant to encapsulate our feelings, thoughts, actions, and so on. And so these therapists out there are doing their best, scratching together, without God, scratching together these terminologies to describe what they're seeing. It's why it's a spectrum. You know, but I think what's most powerful in what you said, Bill, is giving a person the ability to say, well, there's a label. You may have been given that label. And labels are really valuable. They help us know what to work with. But we shouldn't own the label. There's a soul, a living soul, way above and beyond the label. So in the truest sense, and David Miller says this down in Canberra, our college director, is in the end everyone gets healed. Anyone who's walking with God gets healed anyway.
Good.
Because you get to shed all, you know, whether it's now or later, you get to shed all these labels and all these things that plague us. So I agree.
Swedenborg said, when God is present, you will have that feeling of peace that's beyond human understanding.
Yes,
So
yes.
If a therapist is doing the correct thing, here's this person feels really good.
Yes.
They've got this feeling of peace. And all these things, yeah, all right, well, I'm this, that, the other, I'm this, that, and so on and so on. But the Lord loves me. And I'm going to be with that loving presence
Yes.
when I finish with this world.
Yes.
Well, what's it matter if you got a wooden leg or you're OCD? Who cares? If you are loved by God.
Change is the most constant thing in this world. Change is the most constant. Like the wooden leg's going to go. Everything's going to go. You know what I mean? Like
This is going to be that stuff that you just said, I am not my film.
Yeah.
This is going to be a ripper book when you
I hope so. Sure, I hope so.
Yeah, well, looking forward to it.
I want a copy.
Yes, yes. So, Russell, I won't bother. Jane, would you like to read some more? Or was there any other comments before we move on?
I was just a little bit confused about ASD. I've only just realised it recently. I had two good friends, best mates, they were different. And it wasn't until I met Jane what I knew what this autism thing was.
Yeah.
To me, they were just very intelligent at a couple of things, but socially, they were different. And as Bill says, I didn't know what they were. They were just really good in one area, and socially they were different.
Well,
Yes.
where do you reckon Swedenborg would be on the spectrum? He got engaged, but he never got married. There's all these inventors. I really like eccentric people.
So do
Come
I.
up with new stuff.
That's why
That's why we talk to you. That's why we talk to you.
Yeah, that's right. But I've been called eccentric. I've always said it, but I think we're all sort of eccentric. If you're not an eccentric, you're
Everyone
a
is
little bit
unique,
blind.
Chris. We are truly.
By saying Swedenborg encourages people like us to join his church.
Yes, yes.
The older I get, the more I notice that I've never really seen two people alike. Then that one over there is a totally unique human being
Very,
with unique gifts.
very.
Good on you, Mum.
You know, in cultures like ancient cultures where shamanism stuff is popular, they don't look at mental illness as mental illness. They look at it as a calling and awakening. Think about that. That's very powerful. These eccentric people are people who are starting to break out of this default mode network of the brain and experience creative flow. They just haven't got the other tools to manage all of that. And so, you know, we have ways of labelling it because we're looking for solutions, aren't we? We're all looking for New Jerusalem.
How can we have an ill mind? You can have a damaged brain.
Yes.
But an ill mind must be sin or evil. I can't think of anything else. How else can you have a mental illness?
Yes.
Well, we're reading a sermon about Moses, and they're saying that this was a New Church thing, wasn't it? And they're saying that Moses may have had epilepsy. And who knows, in some indigenous tribes around the world, they believe that epilepsy, I've looked into this, and they believe that people with epilepsy are caught between two worlds. It's almost like their physical and their spiritual are sort of fighting each other. And
they're finding that with Parkinson's and all of those kind of brain disorders or things. The research is finding that actually certain parts of the brain are active. That is like a crossing over where they're in both worlds. They're stuck at times between.
And it's good to see that we're embracing this now. I mean, here we do, but outside you can. I think we've just labelled things completely physical for too long. And I think in another 50 years, this is going to change. Hopefully it's going to. And with the advancement of neuroscience, all these things, we're going to be able to treat people in a way. I watch Louis Theroux, and he went to a home, a psychiatric home for people who have schizophrenia. And the first thing they talk about is evil spirits.
Wow.
The first thing, and I'm like, my mum's like, oh, this is. But the thing is, this man, he was ill. He murdered his mother.
Oh.
But she started swearing, so he was going to a Pentecostal church.
Oh.
And he started talking about swearing. So she was possessed, but actually he was possessed. So he was saying she started swearing. So that's not my mum, and so he.
You know, I just want to give you another quickie.
Yeah.
This is back from this. This is the unconscious mind.
Yes.
On the 22nd of June, I'm going to, under general anaesthetic, Dr. Simon Nasser is going to dig a whole lot of holes in every sinus in my head is chocker.
Okay.
On these CAT scans. I'm driving here today, and either one of my two angels, who I speak with, the Lord says, the basis of this is congealed tears.
Oh.
You've been weeping about these things for so long, and
Yes.
not weeping, but they've all congealed. And there's some fungus has grown in there, and there's some bacteria that's grown on the fungus, and the whole lot's a complete and utter mess.
Wow.
But the whole basis was congealed tears.
Wow.
And it's true.
I love it. I love the way you see these connections. Can I steer that back to what we're saying here?
Can I ask a question still?
Oh yeah, go.
My question is, the thing that puzzles me is the connection. I don't know what's the connection between mental illness and evil, because this guy who killed his mother, you can say, well, that's an evil thing. But from God's point of view, it's because I presume if you're mentally ill, therefore you're not responsible. But my view, if there's evil spirits in the spirit world and they're saying to kill yourself or kill someone else, then if you go along with that, so how much is it your responsibility and how much of it? So I just don't know the connection between how much of the mental illness is they're really mentally ill, therefore they're not responsible, or they're listening to evil from the spirit world and they follow through. Without my friend, he killed himself last night.
Sorry to hear
Burned
that.
himself to death. And my view is, I don't know if the Swedenborg says stuff between this is mental illness and you're not responsible, and this is evil and you're responsible. Is there any insight into that at all?
Jesus, if you are blind, you have no sin.
Yeah.
So we don't know what blinded him. Something blinded him to reality.
Because I read this thing in the New Church this morning about suicide,
Yeah.
and it says how God punishes no one.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter is, if you do something out of malice and you kill yourself out of malice, then that spirit that you've got of malice will still be with you in the next world.
You've got to deal with it.
And but if you kill yourself because you're under stress or different circumstances and you're a good person but you're stressful, that's what I'm trying to say. Mental illness and evil. I'm trying to get a better understanding.
Well, look, if I could just address that one thing you did there, because it's such a huge thing you picked open here.
Yeah.
We had a friend who took her life many years ago, and for weeks I was pained about, I'd been told by the church I was in then, that they'd gone to hell, Not directly anyone, but just the belief system of that church. And I was pained and praying and pained, and then suddenly I was flooded with a peace. This is weeks afterwards. And God said, she hasn't gone to hell. I'm like, okay, well, and there's peace, so how do I understand this? But then it might have only been a few days after that, someone said to me this: if you had a loved one who died of cancer or some other disease, out of their control, would you say they've gone? Well, no. Why would you say they've gone to him? That was out of their hand. If you have someone that has died at their own hands with suicide, but they were not mentally well, they had an illness, it's equally the same. God judges by the rational mind. That's all I'll say, is that when you are fully rational and clear and you make choices, that's what God has to look at.
I think one of the old sayings, an idle mind is the devil's playground.
Yeah.
I think that is...
Which is why we've got to get our inner landscape filled with the life of animals and beautiful things and all good things that God said is good. We want to fill it with that. But let's go back to what Bill was saying about sinus and all that. Day 2 is about us learning to climb our ivory tower, to get up into this space, a place of non-judgmental observation, where we can observe. But too often people stay there, feeling good, never go on to day 3 or anything else. And the long-term result of any kind of process we're going through, like your tears, but they never got to be cried, any process that's cut short is it ends up leading to other forms of suffering. It's no good to stay up in an ivory tower. You've then got to get down and walk a mile in somebody else's shoes so that charity can grow. This process of getting up in our ivory tower is about us getting free of all the water and confusion and waves and storms that are going on inside us, so that we can work on the other processes that God wants to do the other days.
I'm going to do some more.
Yes. You want to have a... Yeah, you go. Yeah.
I've got a patient from Bolivia who gets this terrible bipolar depression once a year. And this poor dear soul, she's so depressed, and then I ended up having to send her with I've got this group of pills, but this is bipolar. You can talk all you like. It's a physiological switch, actually.
Right.
She, at the depths of depression, she's talking about killing herself and killing her little dog, her beat, because she's Spanish. And but the fact that she's low, that means she's vulnerable. And this is an evil spirit.
Yeah.
I don't have any doubts whatsoever.
Yeah.
So we had this marvellous thing. I said, let's do something Catholic. This is an Our Father and a Hail Mary and a Glory Be. I'm talking English, she's talking Spanish, and then I kick this rotten thing out. Mm. Now, I'm not ordained. I don't have the authority of the church. I know this is a bit...
But you have the authority of the Lord, Bill.
Oh, I know.
We have the word. Each one of us is ordained by the Lord first,
and in fact,
by man second.
I say, in the name and the authority of the Lord Jesus Christ, you get out.
Yes.
Or if there's a number of them, I want to know the name of the boss. And then in the name and the authority, and I kicked the thing out and fixed her up. So,
But did it work?
Oh yeah. Her son, getting rid of evil spirits is not hard.
No.
It's prayer. Pills don't work, but prayer does. Your friend was wrestling with some lie, and he was told that he'd be better off, or the world would be better off dead. And it might have been said to himself, my cousin did this. Just, you know, you think of the pain that the poor soul must have gone through.
But the world now doesn't believe in evil spirits, so this idea of exorcism, is that something that Swedenborg spoke about? I know it talks about how our thoughts, well, not really our thoughts, but our thoughts are intermingled. If we think good things, and spirits, heavenly angels will intermingle with our thoughts or evil, they will intermingle. But do we have this idea that we can actually, we're possessed, and we can be, if we
Just aware of the time there, Paul.
Sorry.
I'll say something,
Yeah.
and I can only speak for myself here, you know, in terms of the church. I know that before becoming a Swedenborgian minister, I travelled the world with healing ministry and cast out all sorts of evil spirits, and I've seen people writhe on the ground like snakes just from having cancer cast out of them.
Yeah.
It's easy to cast out evil spirits. It really works. The condition that concerns me the most is, can I follow up with that person? Can I have the time that it takes to keep the house filled with the Lord? Cleaning the house is easy.
But if they're
Filling
still
it
attracted to
with the
those things.
Lord is what will keep the 7 strong spirits that come back later out. That's the key for me. So in the new church, we focus on maybe a slower process. We're not saying that what Bill's doing is wrong at all. Bill's a therapist too, so he's able to work with these people. But we would take a slower process of working with the Word, let the Lord work on your issues one at a one. And even Jordan Peterson says that ideologies possess people. Think about that. Ideologies possess people. It takes time to get these things out and keep them out. So we take a slower process of things like Sacred Circle, of building the Word into people. We'll pray, we'll cast spirits, we'll do all this sort of stuff, but it's more important that people are learning to become followers of the Lord so that they stay well.
So in other words, you're saying they turn to the light, get help from the light, and turn to the darkness again. So,
We do that many times a day, every one of us.
but these people aren't. They get a spark.
I have to explain, Paul, that
Yes, yes.
99.9% of the time, I don't tell the thing to go. I tell the patient that you can tell the rotten thing to go.
Right.
In the name of the authority of the
That's
Lord
beautiful.
Jesus Christ.
Wow.
But I've known this lady for such a long time, and I knew that she was in such a mess that I decided to kick the rotten thing out.
Right.
Now, I don't usually do this because I'm not ordained and I don't have the church, the authority.
Well, you do have the
But I-
authority.
well,
You do have the authority,
no,
Bill.
I do. But I don't.
But that was probably the Lord. Look, you don't want to, one thing you want to do is not limit God. You know, it was John Wimber from the Vineyard Church that said, when you come to God, have an empty toolbox and open it. Let's see what God puts in there. You know, you get too hard and fast with rules. And so if you feel led of the Lord, do that. But I know, Bill, that, you know, you're there for people too. I think the key is, if you were going to run around casting out demons, you need to be there for people. Think about
Many
it.
doctors do not recognize this, what
No.
Bill has been saying
No.
about it. See, unless you become an observer, a
Yes,
witness,
yes.
you cannot identify which is evil, which is not evil. So when he is, because
Wow.
he's observing and keeping himself out of the doctor arena,
Yes.
it doesn't look like a medical doctor, a psychologist, but it looks like in a divine perspective,
Yes.
as an observer. So he's able to locate the spirit as an evil spirit.
Yes.
Otherwise, the distinction between evil and good is very difficult to demarcate. Because you are not here to treat a spirit, you are here to treat a body,
Yes.
and the brain and the mind. So doctors normally dwell in this. So doctors are the real culprits, who really, keep someone loading with the drugs and drugs and drugs.
This is true.
Destroy the life.
But Dr. Noel, all I would say in defence of doctors is it's the training you're given. They can't operate outside the training they're given. And so like Chris is saying, hopefully the future will come. We're 120 years behind in science. 120 years behind. Quantum science has been around a long time.
Behind what?
In where the knowledge is up to in science and actually what's out there in the field. Like I worked with kids in therapy and out-of-home care for years, and only 10 years ago did I start hearing about solution-focused type of approach. Yet Steve had been around since the 70s talking about solution-focused brief therapy. It took 30 years for it to get into the industry. It takes a long time. Even the guy that discovered, Pascal, who's the one that discovered that you should wash your hands before working with pregnant women? Yeah, it took another 30 years before they stopped killing women, doctors killing women, because they actually started to wash their hands before going from a patient that had one disease and then going and helping a woman give birth. These kind of things. It takes a long time for us to catch up. So, look, I will say this. You nailed it, Dr. Noel, you nailed it, that this process is about us discerning the waters below from the waters above. I give you a clean, pure cup of water to drink, but if someone put a drop of arsenic in it, are you able to discern that it's corrupted? This is what this space is all about. It's about learning to discern the waters below.
It's not the failure that the medical profession is, it's they are taught a lie.
Sure.
And they are taught that there are no waters above.
Yeah, that's true.
It's all about the physical body, and that's all there is.
You're spot on.
She's spot on, yeah. Yep. Now, this is fantastic stuff. I just don't want anybody feeling that we're all where we're at because, we're coming from a fallen state and the Lord's church is coming up. But let's plough through a few more paragraphs because we're really getting there. The idea of discerning between what is the voices of God inside me, beautiful rain from heaven, and what are my own ego waters, which evil spirits work through.
Right.
That's kind of what we're getting at. So, spiritual ability to be present with our thinking, feeling and actions. Did we read that?
No.
While consciously separated, and I'll let you take over to read in a minute, Jane, but I'm just going to plough through a few paragraphs. Spiritual ability to be present with our thinking, feeling and actions while consciously separating from them is a divine act, only possible because of the light of heaven. So see how day one is building on day two here. And that light of heaven is penetrating the soul's consciousness. That's why we should never let go of the light that you're getting. When you get a bit of revelation, hover with it, work with it till it's integrated through a practice in your life. Day one light helps us identify the chaos. Day two has us learning to separate from the chaos and thereby break the egocentric ownership over what is selfish and disorderly. The advancing soul is not defined by chaos. We've all got it. We've all got sin and junk in our lives. Let's not be defined by that. We're not defined by chaos, desires, past practices, or any experience that may be that may have pushed us towards those kinds of behaviours and reactions in life. Instead, what truly defines us in this moment now is our current chosen loves. That's who we are. Right now, God's looking at what are you loving? Are you wanting to be free? Are you wanting to be good? Are you wanting to be true? That's what matters. Therefore, and I jumped a line there, yes. Therefore, as heavenly light and heavenly affections are allowed to reshape the soul, a new creation is being formed directly in the Lord's image and through these spiritual processes. As we build upon the practice of day one, gathering internal light from sacred texts, day two will empower our ability to step into that space between, where we become the observer. How and why is that so? The advancing soul by revelation understands that when we first begin to read sacred text, we bring to it our own natural light. Big key. Every time I'm reading sacred text, I'm telling myself, is this me or is this you, Lord? And I wait for the Lord for something to rise up out of the text. That's the Lord. And you know the taste of clean, fresh water. You know that peace, Bill. You know it's the Lord. Or if what I'm getting from the text is causing me anxiety and stress and pressure, I know that that's my ego muddling and storming the waters. Okay, so we bring our own natural light to text every time, which distorts what we can see and learn from our times of reading. However, the very nature of sacred text is that it contains many deeper spiritual senses. So if we're going to get the effect of day one and day two, we go to sacred text knowing and believing there's more. There's more there. I'm reading this and going, that's boring me. But then I say, there's something here I'm missing. That always brings the life back into it for me. It really does.
Has it ever switched for you? Because I'm saying, if I'm reading something in the Old Testament, I think this is boring.
Yes.
I'll listen to Book of Revelation.
Yes.
I don't understand it. Do you, by persisting, do you get insights from reading it or not?
Please don't take this the wrong way.
Yeah.
I never find it boring anymore.
Yeah.
I find it overwhelmingly incredible and intoxicating and beautiful. My biggest struggle is it's too intense.
Well, for me, I'm still finding it boring. So I'm thinking, do I just persist with it and hopefully...
Yes, sir.
Ask yourself,
Yes, sir.
what is this describing in me?
In me.
Yeah.
In me. Yes.
Just ask yourself, are there dragons? Are there beasts that come up out of the earth?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is the light obscured?
Yeah.
Just ask.
Am I being
guess I
Saul
need
or
to
am
know
I
more
being
about
David?
Spartans.
Am I being this? Am I being that? Yeah, no, it'll come, Bill. It really will. The problem is that just like doctors that have been taught the drug-generated pharmaceutical process
Yeah.
and have lost touch with nature and its herbs and stuff, it's a relearning.
Yeah. So persist in reading the Word every day. And even if you think I'm not getting anything out of it, just have faith in God. Then you
Just have faith. Look, I use that example. Definitely, keep persisting. And if this was full of uranium coffee, would you just mind holding that for me? Don't worry, don't drink any. You don't need to drink any. Just, I don't have to understand how uranium is formed.
Yeah.
I don't need to be is there a term, Darren, for a uranium scientist? I don't know. Not a urologist, because that's...
I think they're called muffins.
Yeah, I don't have to be a scientist to know that stuff's going to affect me. Just being faithfully in the presence of the Word, even though you aren't getting it, is going to radiate its love and goodness into you. But I promise you, if you continue and you keep coming to Sacred Circle, because what we're getting here is bits of a book called Unlocking the Power of Sacred Text. We go through parables. These bits we're doing now, the days, are the bits between. Sacred 7, the book that I'm endeavouring to write, Lord willing, would be to deal with nothing but the 7 days. But if you keep coming to Sacred Circle, we're going to go through all the parables of Jesus, which really are the Lord's way to train you to unlock the rest of Sacred Text. He trains you through parables to unlock it. So
I would think Revelation, like the Swedenborgian approach to it, is very different to the mainstream approach of it.
That's so true.
I
That's so
would
true.
be thinking, if you can tap into sermons about it,
Yeah.
then that you probably are going to
I
get
know I need
more.
to know more about
You're
the
going
Lord
to get more
correspondence.
out of you.
But
that was so well said, Jane. I should let you take over and do some reading now.
Revelation 13 is about Bitcoin. 666 is www. So
That's interesting.
It's not. No. Well, I know. That
Do you know it's also no? That the number 6 is no. Where all the promises of God are yes. And amen. No, Bill, see, I have no objection to saying Revelation 13 is Bitcoin or it's this or that. These sacred text is going to do this, Bill. If you were reading it 300 years ago, it would be speaking to the world that you're living in then, and it will be giving you very general, real revelation. It'll give you revelation. It will.
Multiple meanings, yeah.
It does, and we don't see, in the spiritual church, we don't deny those multiple meanings. But out there, churches end up saying, well, you've got to either be preterist, pre, post, trib. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. You've got to have this view and you've got to hold it. But the Word of God says, that He was, is, and always will be. He is all those revelations and so much more.
in here, I know
Yes.
that New Jerusalem has arrived.
Yes.
But I can't actually prove it.
I see it. I see it in you.
Yeah, well, I see it,
Yes.
but who am I to sort of see? But I know it's right.
Just keep shining that light, Bill.
Yeah.
That's all that matters. Just keep shining that light. Go on, Jane. Take over and
Did you finish that?
no, finish it for me. I don't think I did.
Where were we?
I'll do it then. Okay. In order for heavenly light to reach us, we must approach sacred text with a right attitude. I said this on a podcast the other day, right? Prayer is 99% attitude and 1% faith. Think about that.
Well, yes.
Because you've either got to know and believe God is good, forget whether you can use the power of faith. If there are people who can use the power of faith and they're using it for evil. You've got to know and believe God is good. That's where the fight, the power to win the fight comes every time. And every time you pray something, there will be a fight.
You get all these Catholics, pray for me, and you're supposed to go, and I say, look, I will think fondly of that. That's it, because that's all I can do. When I pray, I ask in a sort of emotional sort of way. I don't go yakky.
No, beautiful.
And that prayer, well, Jesus himself said, don't worry too much about all these different words. Pagans do that. Just go into your room, shut the door, and you just ask and talk to the boss about what.
Pray from love. Beautiful.
And this
Pray from love.
like it's a real Catholic thing to do. Oh, pray for me, pray for me, pray for me. I think it's a bit addictive to sort of get people to pray for you. And I just don't have the time for it. So I just think fondly, it doesn't take long, about this person.
Beautiful. That's lovely. Okay, so...
Fondly about that couple over there all the time.
Okay, so to really enhance day one spiritual work, attitude. When you read sacred text, you're not dealing with a normal text. It's coded in a way that's going to unlock your inner man, or inner woman, inner person. So attitude. When we approach sacred text, do it with the right attitude. We must be looking for its deeper light. This only occurs for souls who know and understand the spiritual light has been deliberately concealed within the very structure of sacred text. Yeah. Okay, Jane, do you want to take over?
So every time spiritual light breaks forth into our consciousness, a greater level of separation is occurring between natural consciousness and spiritual consciousness. To practice day 2 spiritual work, we are deliberately choosing to step into that new space or expanse which sacred text calls heaven. It is here that we can seek intimacy with the divine uninhibited.
Nice. Thoughts, comments? Shall we? Amen. Shall we go and keep going, Jane?
While we are occupying the space between, we are tasting our first true freedom. The troubling egocentric waters below, although present, cannot reach us or disturb our meditations and reflections. Equally important though, the waters above, the heavenly ego, are not exercising undue influence upon our consciousness. They are present if and when we need them. In fact, the pure waters from above will be allowed to refresh the soul from day 3 onward, when new earth is present and the living waters from above can find lasting reception through underground springs and above ground flowing mountainous rivers.
So not until you get to day 3 can you even capture that water. Isn't that an interesting thought? So how important is the conscience? If day 3, that earth coming out of the water is conscience, how important is it to have a conscience that we can capture the waters above? But notice also I've said here, God doesn't want to inflict the truth upon us. Heaven is actually the space between. We only get that water if we thirst for it and ask for it, and it comes down like a gentle rain. If it's coming down like a torrent, that's the ego imitating God. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, Viktor Frankl, he talks about the space between. He says, between the stimulus and the response, that's where we have our power. So we get stimulated.
I saw that quote the other day. I wanted to use it. I love it.
So it's that space where...
Say it again.
Well, there's between the stimulus and the response, there's a space, and in that space we have the power. Because we can, if someone says something horrible to you,
yes,
you can react in a natural way,
yes,
or you can pause and you can think with different reaction, and that's the power we have. We've got to train ourselves not to respond. We have, if we can deliberately have that space in between, we maybe respond differently.
Perfect. Now, Paul, you were sitting there, and that quote or your remembrance of him bubbled up in your mind.
Man search for meaning.
Bubbled up in your mind. Yeah, I know. Yeah. But it bubbled up right then and there.
Yeah.
That was a bit of heavenly rain just coming down, right, and being captured by your land, your conscience, your convictions. And this is exactly what sacred text does, and you're doing it, see? And so as we go along with these days and we really get to understand them, parables, particularly the first parable in the Bible, the creation story, when we get to understand it, unlocks everything else to the point that you're now quoting Viktor Frankl and recognising that he's talking about day 2 spiritual work there. You get a response, a physiological response, a psychological response from your body, could be from something someone says or does, and then you have a reaction to it. Or you can recognise there is a space, a very moment, a quantum moment in between, where there's what? Did you call it? Did he call it?
Well, it says that's where you have your power.
Where you have your power. Yeah. Wow. Talk about real spiritual power. Wow. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Go on, Jane. Go and dig in a bit more before we get there.
Day 2 spiritual work calls out to us for quiet intimacy. It asks us to develop a space within where the divine can commune with us and reveal things to us. It reminds us to draw near to God and He will draw near to you, James 4, verse 8. It calls us to a place of non-judgmental awareness and observations. In fact, Day 2 observations require us to take notice without passing judgment or reacting to our own observations, or we will sink back into the waters below. Day 2 empowers us to quiet down the ego and therefore potentially receive more feedback from others. It offers us respite and relief from the relentless chatter, dictates and emotional waves of the lower ego. It grants us greater freedom from the egocentric life so that we may continue our wondrous journey towards the City of Lights where our eternal family and loved ones await us.
Okay. Now, I haven't heard from Darren this morning. Where are you, Darren? Are you okay?
Yeah, for the doctors, taking it all.
Taking it all easy. Did you have anything you want to say about that? No, you're good? I just know that your wife, Vivian, she's had a lot of experience in, her family, and there's a great... what I see here in Day 2 is a lot of what Buddhism holds up to us is the power of Viktor Frankl, that power of the space between, isn't it? It's beautiful. It's heaven. It's our first real taste of heaven. It's powerful stuff.
It's the difference between drop dead you side and bless your cotton sock. You can say either one of those.
Well, he was called the Buddhist of the North, wasn't he?
He was,
the Buddha
yes.
of the North.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's when someone says to me, I know you're into this God stuff and that, but I believe there's an end. There's an end, that's it. And then years ago when I was I would get my preaching thing on and now I use parables in a way that they can relate to. And I'm seeing people change, and they, especially with parables, are a way of getting to people, non-believers. It's a way we can all, especially with the way that we do in Swedenborgianism, because it's very psychology-based, and you talk about who Swedenborg was. Oh, wow, he was a scientist, and all of a sudden, he's not some just theologian or like his father was. So, I believe I'm making progress with what I'm learning here, and the book you sent me the other day, amazing, absolutely amazing. And I've explained this to family members. It says, well, if you believe in your God, what? So you can relate the way we are with God as a parent. So we can't take away the... Why didn't God put his hand in front of those jets that smashed into the Twin Towers? Well, all these things, but God wants us to have freedom. And also there's two things we learn from these, and we grow. How are we supposed to grow? But God can't impede our freedom, and this is what I'm saying to them in a more milder version. So I appreciate you sending me that, because it's helped me a lot. I'm past halfway, but just from that, because friends struggle, and then how can you believe in God when this happens?
What's the name of the book?
Why does God let it happen?
Yeah, why does God let it happen? Yeah. It's a recap of the rabbi.
Good people.
Yeah, and I recommend it for anyone struggles with when you're talking about God, but I do it in a milder version, otherwise they turn away and go, like my brother calls me to his friends, oh, my Bible bashing twin brother, which I'm far from it, but I really think parables, for me, as you say,
yes.
Well, unlock.
Chris, if you think about it, everything we have psychologically, language, words, all of that, it's imposed over the top of the being of the person. We think, feel and act in a organic, parabolic way. And so language is imposed on top of that. You know what I mean? This is why you go back to the ancients and they talk about dream time or this or that, because we think about the world, we think through the world around us. That's really how we do it. That's why you're reaching people using the parable approach. But a couple other things, right? God is love. That's, what is the highest thing in God? Well, you'd have to say love, wouldn't you? Maybe.
Love, wisdom, service.
Maybe there's something even higher, and maybe I'm just teasing you a little bit here because love can be described in a lot of different ways. Maybe freedom is even more important than love to God. God wants love for you so much. He wants freedom even more.
See,
Because he can't give you that love unless you're left in freedom.
This is the God that cures. This is the God that heals us, that cures us.
Yes.
God of Genesis 1.
Yes.
The God of Genesis 2 is a bad-tempered, lying creep who gets so cranky that somebody eats some fruit that you puts a tree out smack in the middle.
Yes.
Here's this beautiful fruit, really delicious, but it's poisonous, don't touch it.
Yes.
So they have a go. If you try doing that with kids, just see what happens.
Yes.
Tell Elijah he's not going to go.
Yes, but Bill, sacred text can't be sacred text unless it goes into the depths and the darkness of our ego. And you and I have talked about this before. Our ego is what turns God into the tyrant.
I hope
it
when
is.
you get to Genesis 2 that you're not going to say that character that's walking around yelling out, Eve, Adam, where the heck are you?
Yes.
God doesn't do that. He knows where everything's.
Yes.
That's not God.
No. But Bill, I'll explain
But
this way.
anyway,
We're diverting.
I'm just saying that the
Is that
God
still
of we're talking about God of the first chapter of Genesis is love. And I believe, this is my own belief, that only that God can
Yes.
heal us from our addictions and our mess because
Yes.
He loves us.
Yes.
Not this creep from Genesis 2.
No.
Told us that last month. We had the same conversation last month.
Right. Let me just explain it like this, Bill. Let me explain it like this, okay? In this case, I'll be the Lord.
Right.
And you'll be a human being on earth or whatever. And I'm saying up here, Bill, I love you. I would die for you. I'll give everything for you. I love you. But I want you to be free too. But I love you and will do anything for you. Now, between God and, say, the person receiving this case is layers like this. First heaven, second heaven, third heaven, spiritual world, all of the hells, all of these things are there between God saying I love you and what you receive, because we're ego. And by the time it gets filtered down through to the self, depending on how much spiritual work you've done, you might hear, I hate you and you are going to hell. That might be what you hear.
I can interject as a parent of 5 children that I can say something that's so sensitive, gentle, thoughtful way with love in my heart and desire for my child to make the right decision. And they'll go, why are you always shouting at me?
Shouting at you?
I'm literally not, am I right? I'm not raising my voice. I'm saying something in a loving, gentle way.
Yes.
But their perception of my
Yes.
comment is filtered through their feelings about
Yes.
what they're doing.
Yep.
And whether it's right or wrong.
Yep.
And their perception of I will be judging them because they're
That's
judging
beautiful.
themselves.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh yeah. So there is. I say to them, there is no way I can say this to you.
And they learn
Where
a
you're
lesson.
going to accept.
So let's go
what I'm
right back to the purpose of sacred text, Bill. The purpose of sacred text, it was designed and created not to tell us about 6 days of creation and 7 days of rest and then God being angry and smashing. Created on a completely different level for our psychology to regenerate. When angels read Genesis 2, they're not reading what you're reading. But I understand on a very simple level why you could look at Genesis 2. I think it's love in you that reads Genesis 2 on a very simple level and says, there's something wrong there.
Well, I don't know about love being, you ate that bloody mandarin that I told you not to. So piss off, and if you starve to death, I couldn't give a damn. And you,
Yes.
every time you have a child, you'll suffer.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
I don't believe that. I'd say, please, may I have God from Genesis 1 that loves me, who cares about me.
Remember, the goal is to go beyond the garden to the great city with its gardens. And And there's a journey. There's a long. We're on a long journey.
The problem is that I know where Genesis 2 had its origin, but we won't.
But use Adam and Eve spiritual meaning, and I say
Yes.
friends of mine say, oh, these rich people, and oh, look at that house, and they worked hard for it. These people, they've studied, say, 7 to 10 years to get it. But I say, think of Adam and Eve. They concentrate. God gave them everything they needed, but they looked at what they didn't have.
Bingo. Yeah.
And he goes, wow, that's so cool.
He didn't give them everything they needed.
Well,
to start with.
Oh, they didn't concentrate on what they had at hand.
Could we continue this one afterwards? We should close the circle.
We'll have to do.
Be grateful for what they had.
No,
All we're
I'm
saying, Bill, is have faith.
so
He does. He loves Jesus. He
with
loves
this
Jesus.
alleged
God will
this
enlighten your
alleged
mind.
Lord God. And there was him,
Yes.
dirt, irrigation,
Yes.
and nothing else.
Yeah.
No trees, no nothing. He goes, and he's a male human being
Yes.
who doesn't have he's just waiting for those trees to grow so he can get something to eat. What a heap of conjugal. But I know where that story came from.
Right.
But anyway, we'll just
come back to it. Come back to it.
Thank you very much for today.
Let's close in prayer.
Excellent writing,
Brother. Let's close. Well, we shouldn't hold hands, but we will. Okay. Make sure you clean your hands afterwards if you. Sorry. Let's just say after me, dear Lord.
Dear Lord,
Let me approach sacred text
let me approach sacred text
with a wonder, with a hunger, like a child, expecting to receive light, love, and all the fruits of heaven. Amen. Amen. Yes.
Well, praise to you.
That's good.
Well done.
Great.